Hello everyone, this is Shalvi Sheetal from She Coders and we are back with a new series of tutorials on Python. We shall be covering a vast number of topics in this series of tutorials, so let us begin today with the introduction to Python. I'm Shalvi Sheetal and I'm currently in my pre-final year of Computer Science and Engineering. So what is Python? It is basically a programming language. Python is a general purpose programming language that is often applied in scripting roles. It was created by Russian and was released in 991. Basically, it is a new language. It is much newer than C and C++ and Java. So it is basically more modern than them. So Python is considered a programming language as well as a scripting language. What are scripting languages? They are something which are directly interpreted. We shall be looking at them quite soon. So Python is basically known as an interpreted language. It does not require compilation. Python has a vast number of uses. Some of them include web development, software development, and mathematics as well as in system scripting. You shall be hearing the scripting word really a lot number of times. So next, let us look at what is a program and what is a scripting language. What is the basic difference between them? So Python is known as a scripting language. We must know what does it mean. A program is basically executed. That is, the source file is first compiled and then the result of that source file is expected. Unlike programs, a script is interpreted. What it basically means is that skips compilation. The script is executed line by line, so it doesn't require to be compiled. A program in general is a series of instructions written so that a computer can perform a certain task. Whereas on the other hand, a script is a code which is written in a scripting language, somewhat as in Python. A scripting language is nothing but a type of programming language in which we can write code to control another software application. So I hope you get it now. A scripting language is basically an interpreted language. It does not require compilation, so it is executed faster. So why use Python? Why not stick to the usual languages of C, C++, or Java? There are a whole lot of reasons for that. Some of them which include Python is object-oriented. Just like C++ and Java, Python is also object-oriented. It shows all concepts like polymorphism, operation overloading, as well as multiple inheritance. All the features of OOPS are also supported by Python. Next is indentation. In C++, we require curly braces to indicate the scope of a variable or a block of statements. But in Python, the indentation is itself sufficient to indicate that the block ends there. Next, it is free. It is an open source application, so downloading and installing Python is extremely easy. Working with it will be as easy as that. You'll be watching it real soon. So next, we see that Python is also a very powerful language. It supports dynamic typing. It has a huge number of built-in types and tools. One of the most prominent features of Python which stands out and makes it unique is a large number of libraries and modules it possesses. It has a large number of third-party utilities like NumPy, SciPy, and lot of more libraries. Also, it has automatic memory management, so you don't need to do that explicitly. Lastly, Python is also portable. It runs on every major platform used today, and no matter what the application or what the server is, your Python code shall perform in exactly the same way. Next, it is mixable. It can be linked to a number of other components which are written in other languages. For example, Python and C language integration is very common. It has a multiple number of users which shall be seen later. Next, it is easy to use. It is often considered that Python is written in plain English language. The syntax is so simple that you shall understand it immediately. No intermediate compilation steps are required. As I earlier mentioned, Python is an interpreted language, so it skips the step of compilation. Python programs are compiled automatically to an intermediate form called a bytecode. which the interpreter then reads. So it doesn't require to be compiled separately. It is directly interpreted and executed line by line. Lastly, as I have already mentioned earlier, Python is extremely easy to learn. Its syntax, its structure, everything is very, very intuitive and easy to grasp. So nextly, let us look at some of the most common uses of Python. Python has a multiple number of uses in system programming, in GUI programming, in internet scripting, component integration, database programming, as well as in gaming, images, robotics, and many more. You can execute, you can make a number of projects, a number of software applications simply using Python. There are a number of web frameworks in Python like Flask, Django, using which you can build independent software applications. Python also supports integration with databases. So we can build a number of web applications just by using Python and its frameworks. So in this series of tutorials, I shall be using Jupyter Notebook for executing Python codes. You can also install the Jupyter Notebook application by following the link which I have already provided. There are many alternatives that it's not compulsory to use just Jupyter. You can go for PyCharm or VS Code or many other platforms. Nextly, we shall be looking at what exactly is the Python syntax? How are variables declared? How are codes executed? We shall be looking each and every one of them. Python isn't something which you can learn simply by memorizing, by looking at the slides. The more you practice, the more shall you gain. So let us quickly jump to looking at the most basic features of Python. This is the Jupyter Notebook layout, which I shall be using for running Python codes, as I have already mentioned earlier. So as Python is an interpreted language, you don't need to write a bunch of statements to execute a simple line of code. It is executed line by line, so simply declaring a variable will also do. Python has no declarations actually. You need to initialize a value to a variable in order for its existence. For example, in C, you need to include header files, you need to put curly braces, you need to write int name, and then you need to put semicolons to indicate the end of statements. But Python has no such requirements. The naming convention of variables in Python is quite similar to other languages like C, C++, and Java. Keywords cannot be used to create variables. Keywords like if, for, or any other print, they can't be used to create variables. You need to give names of your own which are not keywords. Also, variable names should start with alphabet or an underscore only. They cannot begin with a digit. You can put in digits later, but identifier names cannot begin with a digit. Next, we cannot give space between the name of a variable. For example, it shall be more clear if we do it using an example. So let us begin with variable naming convention. So as I already said, it should begin with a name. An alphabet, you cannot use a digit. So for example, you can give it an apple. Apple is equal to 1. This is valid. In order to execute a cell of Jupyter Notebook, you need to hit Shift plus Enter at the same time. These are some of the shortcut keys as I have already given in this notebook. I shall be sharing it with you guys. So these are some of the useful shortcuts which will come handy when you use Jupyter Notebook later on. So in order to execute a single cell of the Jupyter Notebook, you need to hit Shift plus Enter at the same time. As I said, you don't need to include any header files or put on semicolons. This apple is equal to 1 is an individual statement in itself. You don't need to write include or semicolons or anything. Simply writing x is equal to 5 and then hitting shift plus enter is valid enough. Now if you want to know the value of x, you can simply put in x and then hit shift plus enter and 5 is displayed as the value of x. This is known as the shell output, sorry, I apologize. This is known as the shell output. On hitting shift plus enter, you shall be acquiring it. And if you don't want the shell output, you want the standard output, then you need to mention print and within parenthesis x, and this is going to give you the value of x. This is the standard output and this is the shell output. Now, as I already said, a variable name can begin with an underscore or it can simply be an underscore. You can mention underscore is equal to 10 and this is valid, and then when you find for underscore it is 10, but it cannot begin with a digit. For example, if you want to write 1a is equal to 10, it will give you an error. It is a syntax error since the variable name cannot begin with 1, but you can write a1 is equal to 10 and that shall be valid because digit comes after a letter. A variable name cannot begin with a digit, but a digit can be joined in later on. So these are the naming conventions. Also, you cannot give space. For example, this same a1 cannot be written as a space 1 is equal to 10. This will again give a syntax error. So you have to mention a variable name satisfying all of the above three conditions. Keywords cannot be used. Variable name should start with alphabet or underscore, and we cannot give space between the names of the variables. Another useful thing when you assign the value to the variables is, for example, you can simply write x comma y is equal to 1 comma 2, and this is valid. You don't need to mention the type of the variable, int or float or anything. Python accepts it automatically. It shall know that it is an integer value. If you want to check, for example, you can write type of x and it will give as int. Python interprets it automatically. For example, in C++, you write an entire code, an entire block of statements, and then you execute it, and then after it is compiled, it gives you all the errors at all possible lines. But in Python, since it is executed line by line, for example, if you encounter a problem at line number 2, then it is not going to check for line number 4. It will simply give you an error at line number 2 and stop the execution. It is not going to check for statements after line number 2. So Python is an interpreted language. Keep that in mind. You can execute a single line of Python code at a single time. So you need to write each and every line correctly in order to reach the end of the program. So this type function indicates the type of any variable, data type of any variable. For example, if we take a as a float value 8.5 and then we check for type of a, it is going to give you as float type. Python automatically understands that it is a float type and hence gives you the required value. Nextly, we shall be covering many topics. Yes, as I already said, indentation. Now, for example, if you're writing a code in C, then you shall be writing hash, then include, then for example, if you consider stdio.h and then you are going to write in main and then you begin a set of curly braces and your entire code execution will be within those curly braces, right? You need to declare the variable, then you need to initialize it to something, and then in order to print the value of that, you need to write printf x, and each statement is executed by ending it with a semicolon. But Python does not require all that. Python is an interpreted language. It requires no semicolons, nothing. You can simply write it as x is equal to 5 and then write print x. It is going to give you the value of x. So as I said, indentation is very important since Python does not use curly braces. You have to follow a certain pattern to tell Python that yes, this is the scope of a variable, this is the block of statements, these are the group of statements which you need to execute together. For example, the if syntax in Python is quite similar to C++, so let us go with that. If we check x is greater than 0, then we put a semicolon here to indicate the start of if statements, and then we write print x. So this indentation indicates that since it is after a tab, after some space after if, this is a new block of statements which will be executed under the if statement. And if we execute it, then it will give us 5 since the earlier value of x was 5 and it is greater than 0, so the value of x is printed. But if we would have added another statement where we assign the value of x as 0 and then we print x, then since it is not under if, it will be executed. X is 0, which is not greater than 0, it is same as 0, but still the value of x is printed because it does not come under the if statement. If we would have again considered it, but this time we cut it and paste it here under the if statement, then this time the result shall be quite interesting. As you can see, now none of the statements are executed. Since the x was already assigned as 0, now x is actually 0. If you make it as 5 again and then you execute it, then two print statements shall be executed. The value of x is greater than 0, which is 5, and hence both of the print statements are executed. But if now x value is now 0, now if you execute it again, none of the statements are executed since they fall under the if scope and it checks whether x is greater than 0 or not. So since the value of x is 0 now, you can check it again. The value of x is 0, hence none of the print statements are executed. Nextly, let us come to comments in Python. How exactly is a comment written in Python? More importantly, what is a comment? Comment is something which helps you actually. It is a note or a bit of information related to your code which shall help you in debugging later or in better understanding of your code. To write a Python comment, you need to begin it with hash and then write this is a Python comment, and this statement shall be ignored by the interpreter completely. It will not be considered as a piece of code, it will not be executed. This shall be ignored completely. So this is simply a statement which shall be of use to you yourself. You can use it as a bit of information which shall help you later stages when you write long codes, and it will help you in what exactly is this code about. Now, what if you need to write a multi-line comment? Then you can't use hash. For example, if you mention this is a Python comment, as you can see, now this is clearly something different. It is in different color, it seems different, it looks different because this Python comment is now considered as a piece of code by the interpreter. So either you can use another hash and this shall be executed as a multi-line comment, or as an alternative you can use triple quotes, and within triple quotes you can write your multi-line Python statement. This is a multi-line Python comment, and this is something which will be considered as a doc string by the interpreter, and it will tell people something about the function or something about your code. It will describe the code you have written. So it is basically considered a multi-line comment. Either you can use multiple hashes for different lines, or you can go simply with the triple quotes, or everything will be considered as a comment here. Nextly, which I wanted to cover something is about the declaration of strings in Python. For example, if you want to write a simple string as in Python. Then this is a string which is simply written within simple quotes and it will be considered as a Python string by the interpreter. Now what if you want to write a line? Can you use single quotes or multiple quotes, or what can you go for? Either you can use a single quote. Python is easy. This is same as writing within double quotes. There is no issue here, and you can write the same statement within double quotes as well. Now what if you want to include something of a symbol like an apostrophe, a single quote? Now there will be an issue in this case. What if you want to write Python's name? Now the color has again changed, indicating something is wrong with our code. This will give you a syntax error here, since the single quotes here indicate that this is a string in itself, and anything which comes after the ending single quote is considered as code instead of a string by Python. So since this single quote ends here, everything after that will be considered as a separate piece of code instead of a string by Python. Now double quotes come into rescue here. You can write Python's name, and this will be a simple string in this case. As you can see, double quotes come in more handy. You can use simple quotes when there is a simple line of information or a single word, but it is preferable to use double quotes as you won't face any issue if you embed other quotes within them. Now what if you want to write a multi-line quotes? Can you also use double quotes for that? Let us look. Now multi-line Python. So again the line has changed, the color has changed. So this is going to give us an end of line error in Python. This is a syntax error again, indicating that you cannot use double quotes when you need to write something which consists of multiple lines in Python. So what should you do? What is the solution here? As I have already mentioned, you can use triple quotes. And multi-line Python, this string is a legit multi-line string and there will be no issues again. This \n indicates that we have jumped to a next line after the word multi-line, indicating that this is a multi-line string. This is something you must know and you must not get confused about. Now let us check out the print statement in Python. In C++, you can use cout. In C, you can go for printf. What is the alternative for printing in Python? In Python, for printing a statement or a variable or a string or anything you like, you can simply use print hello. And this is going to give you the output as hello. Any string can be embedded within quotes inside the print parenthesis to print the required string statement there. Now what if you want to print the value of a variable instead of simply a string? Then in that case, you need to initialize the variable first of all. Suppose x is equal to 10. And then if you want to know its value, you can simply write print x without any quotes. And this is going to give you the value of x. Remember, if you put the quotes within the parenthesis and then mention x, it is going to give you the value within the quotes, which is x. Instead of what x stands for, it is going to simply put in x. So if you want to know the value of a variable, you need to skip out the quotes. Now what if you want to combine a string as well as a variable? In that case, the solution is quite simple as well. You can simply write the value of x is x. So you have demarcated the boundary value using a simple comma, and the part before comma within quotes is the string part, and the part after comma is simply the variable. And since simple x is mentioned, it is going to give you the value of x, which is 10. Now by default, the separation value in Python is space. As you can clearly see, After is, I have not put any space, but by default there is a space between is and 10. What if you want the space, the demarcation, the separation to be something else? Then in that case, you can simply write the value of x is x, and you can mention the separation explicitly. Suppose you want to give it as a tab, then you need to put in slash tab. What if you want it to go to the next line in the execution? Then again, you can use the same pattern, print it, and the separation will be n here. And clearly you can see the value has gone to the next line in this case. So tab indicates a greater than space, and n is something which will take you to the next line here. I hope that is clear. Now, nextly, error I guess. If I executed it again, now it is giving the tab as a bit more of space within is and 10. I don't know what was wrong. So nextly, we move to numbers in Python. How are numbers stored? We can have float, int, long int, short int. You must be familiar with these terms. But those don't come handy in case of Python. In Python, any variable, for example, var, can store as long a value you want it to. You don't need to explicitly declare that var has to be a float value and long int, a short int, a double, or anything else. There are no such needs here. The type of var will be int. Everything is an int here unless and until it is declared as a float value consisting of decimal points. If the same var would have been declared as with a decimal value, then we would have checked for the type of var, it would have given as float. So if anything is mentioned as simply a number, it will be considered as int in Python, and in every other case, it shall be considered as a float if it consists of decimal points. Now what about strings? What is the type of strings here? Let us check out. So S is string here, namely Python, and then we check the type of S, and as you can see, it is str, which represents string. So you can check out the data type of any variable, any value in Python by simply using the type function. It will be helpful if you um, want to know about anything, about any function or variable or data type, you can use the help function in Python. Namely, if you put help and then type, then it represents and gives you or provides you with an entire detailed document of how can the type function can be used, what are its arguments, what are its types, what are its methods. Everything is clearly laid out in front of you. This is the reason Python is very helpful and easy to learn. So you can always use the help function whenever you want to know about any function, method, or a variable. Now let us come to IDs in Python. What is an ID? ID is a method. Let us see what it does. Suppose you want to know the ID of x. It is this value. Now what if you write x is equal to x plus 5 and then check out the value of x. As you can see, the ID of x has now changed. Since the value of x has changed, its ID has also changed. ID is something of an unique integer value which uniquely identifies any value in Python. Now, if the variable changes, the ID of that variable changes as well. So every variable, when it is intact in its lifetime in Python, is assigned a unique ID value. It shall not overlap with the ID value of any other variable in the same lifetime. So whenever you want to check if two values are same or not, you can use the ID. If two elements possess different IDs, then they are clearly different elements. So IDs come in handy when you want to check if two elements are same or not. Now let us come into operators in Python. All operators are the same ones, modulo or plus, minus, into, division, everything is same. Let us now assign two values to two variables and we can operate on them. X is assigned the value of 5 and y is assigned the value of 10. You could have done it easily using the simple comma 5 comma 10 and it would have given you the same results. So now x is 5, y is 10. If you want to perform addition, you simply can give the addition operator. It is going to give you as 15. The subtraction is similar and you can put in the minus and the result is 5 minus 10 minus 5. What if you want the product? Then for product you can use the product symbol y and 5 into 10 is 50. For division the method is same, but there is an interesting concept here. If you write x divided by y and then hit shift enter, you receive something as 0.5, right? Now there is a different operator in Python. It is the integer division operator. If you use double slashes instead of single for division, it gives you as 0. Why is that so? Because this is integer division. It is only going to give you the part before the decimal point. For example, if we write y divided by x now, it is given as 2.0 instead of simply 2. But if you write y double slash x, it is going to give you simply as 2. Irrespective of the decimal part, it is only going to provide you with the integer part in case of double slashes. So Python has a new operator here which is double slash and it is going to give you the integer part only of the division. It is completely going to ignore the part after the decimal point. Python also has the modulo operator. For example, if you write 8 modulo 3, it is going to give you as 2 because 8 divided by 3 is equal to 2 and the remainder is 2. So 8 mod 3 is given as 2. Modulo basically provides you with the remainder. Now nextly, let us see what topics are we left with. I guess we have covered most of them and I have provided you with the shortcuts. You can have a look at it and it will be very helpful, I must say. It can provide you with the help functions. Kindly go through it. So we have today seen the variable naming conventions, the comments, how are comments declared in Python. Now let us get a bit more familiar with print function and formatting in Python. We have clearly seen here that if we want the concatenation of a variable and a string, we can simply put in comma. Now what if there are multiple variables? What if there are two variables here? Now if you want to write the value of both x and y here, you need to write print the value of x is, then you need to put in x, and then for y again you need to put in the value of y is and another comma and then y. Sorry, my bad, I skipped a comma here. Yeah, so this is the required syntax if you want to write the value of more than one variable. Now what is the solution? Easier solution instead, what else can we do? There are a number of ways for it, and this is called string formatting basically. There is this f function which stands for format in Python, and let us have a look at it. Now this is something I have already prepared, so that it shall be easier to understand and won't take much of our time. So consider a situation where x is assigned the value of 10 and y is assigned the value of 20. Now, as I've already told, in order to execute or print the value of variables, we can simply separate the statement by using a simple comma, and that would work just fine. But what if instead we need to concatenate multiple statements, multiple strings and variables? In that case, formatting is often used. You can always go for the traditional separation by comma method, or else you can put a simple f before beginning the statement, and you can write the value of variable within curly braces inside the statement, and that will print the value as 10. As you can clearly see, it does not mention curly braces x in the output. It just gives the value of x here, which is 10, and in place of y, it gives the value of variable y instead of writing curly braces and y inside that. If you would have skipped the f symbol instead, it would have given you just curly braces and then x and then curly braces and then y. But since you have written the F, which stands for formatting, it is going to give you the values of x and y instead of just x and y. You can also write it in another way, namely format. F stands for format here, and if you put the curly braces here, and then you write dot format for the entire string and write x and y, then the corresponding braces shall be matched with the variables inside the parenthesis of format. So x comes in place of the first curly braces and y comes in place of the second curly braces, and then the required output is obtained. What if you want a different order of the variables? What if you want to mention the order of the variables explicitly? Then you can begin the numbering from 0 and then 1, and then you can follow the same format again. In this case, x, since it is mentioned first, it is given the value of 0 and x is 0 value here. So x value is printed first and then comes the value of variable y. But if the order is reversed and this is assigned 1 and this is assigned 0, so as you can see, the value of x is now 20, which is the original value of y. So we see that y is printed in place of the first curly braces and x in place of the second curly braces. The order is reversed, so the values are reversed as well. Another method which resembles to C is something using percentage symbols. In C as well, we use printf and then we explicitly mention the type of data like percentage %d or percentage %s for string, percentage %c for characters, and then mention the variables. Similarly here, you can write percentage %d, which stands for decimal values, and then putting another percentage symbol, you can add in the variables, and the output shall again be the same here. Now, what if they are float values? What if you want them as float values? Then in that case, you can simply write percentage %f, and that would consider x and y as float variables. If you want to limit the number of decimal places to a constant which only you want to specify, then instead of writing just percentage %f, you can write percentage %.2f, and that would indicate that you want only two places after the decimal point, and that is limited here. As you can see, the number of decimal places is restricted here to 2. So I guess this sums it up for the introduction to Python. Kindly go through the slides and the notebooks I shall be providing you, and it will be all. It is very easy, so don't get demotivated, go through it, and I promise that you shall enjoy it. Thank you.